Hello dear students, welcome to our YouTube channel Smart PTE Tricks. Today I am here in front of you with the good news that now we are starting our PTE online classes. If you are interested, then contact us on the numbers given below. And thanks for your love and support. Keep supporting.
Adams has completely undermined my confidence in these apparently sensible precautions. What he has persuasively argued, particularly in relation to seatbelts, is that the evidence that they do what they are supposed to do is very suspect. This is in spite of numerous claims that seatbelts save many thousands of lives every year. Between 1970 and 1978, countries in which the wearing of seatbelts is compulsory had on average about 5% more road accident deaths than before the introduction of the law. In the United Kingdom, road deaths decreased steadily from about 7,000 a year in 1972 to just over 4,000 in 1989. There is no evidence in the trend for any effect of the seatbelt law that was introduced in 1983. There's actually evidence that the number of cyclists and pedestrians killed increased by about 10%.
Complementary therapies, such as those practiced by naturopaths, chiropractors, and acupuncturists, have become increasingly popular in Australia over the last few decades. Interest initially coincided with enthusiasm for alternative lifestyles, while immigration and increased contact and trade with China have also had an influence. The status of complementary therapies is being revisited in a number of areas: legal regulation, the stances of doctors' associations, their inclusion in medical education, and scientific research into their efficacy. With the exception of acupuncture, complementary therapies are not routinely funded through Medicare, so there is little administrative data regarding their use.
What is a country, and how is a country defined? When people ask how many countries there are in the world, they expect a simple answer. After all, we've explored the whole planet. We have international travel, satellite navigation, and plenty of global organizations like the United Nations, so we should really know how many countries there are. However, the answer to the question varies according to whom you ask. Most people say there are 192 countries, but others point out that there could be more, like 260 of them. So why isn't there a straightforward answer? The problem arises because there isn't a universally agreed definition of country, and because, for political reasons, some countries find it convenient to recognize or not recognize other countries. For example, Taiwan claims to be a country, but China states that Taiwan is just another part of China.
The invasion of non-indigenous plants is considered a primary threat to integrity and function of ecosystems. However, there is little quantitative or experimental evidence for ecosystem impacts of invasive species. Justifications for control are often based on potential, but not presently realized, recognized, or quantified negative impacts. Should lack of scientific certainty about impacts of non-indigenous species result in postponing measures to prevent degradation. Recently, management of purple loosestrife, Lythrum salicaria, has been criticized for lack of evidence demonstrating negative impacts of L.
Recent work has demonstrated that the invasion of purple loosestrife into North American freshwater wetlands alters decomposition rates and nutrient cycling, leads to reductions in wetland plant diversity, reduces pollination and seed output of the native Lythrum elatum, and reduces habitat suitability for specialized wetland bird species such as black terns, least bitterns, pied-billed grebes, and marsh wrens. Conventional methods, physical, mechanical or chemical, have continuously failed to curb the spread of purple loosestrife or to provide satisfactory control. Although a number of generalist insect and bird species utilize purple loosestrife, wetland habitat specialists are excluded by encroachment of L. salicaria.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the relationship between standard and non-standard language is, evidently, still an uncertain one. We are at a transitional point between two eras. We seem to be leaving an era when the rules of standard English, as selected and defined by prescriptive grammarians, totally conditioned our sense of acceptable usage, so that all other usages and varieties were considered to be inferior or corrupt and excluded from serious consideration. And we seem to be approaching an era when non-standard usages and varieties, previously denigrated or ignored, are achieving a new presence and respectability within society, reminiscent of that found in Middle English, when dialed variation in literature was widespread and uncontentious.
The presentation will cover copyright's position as one of the intellectual property rights and how it differs from other intellectual property rights. It will give an overview of what copyright protects as well as what may be done with copyright-protected works without permission under permitted acts, sometimes or so-called exceptions. It is by manipulating the restricted acts through licensing arrangements that rights owners establish and exploit commercial markets. In contrast to commercial markets, the growth of open source and open content licensing models has challenged established business models. The presentation gives a brief commentary on two of the more prominent open licensing frameworks, the new Creative Commons licenses. Symptoms start with a fever over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, chills, headache or body aches within a week. The patient has a dry cough, which might progress to shortness of breath. In 10% to 20% of cases, patients require mechanical ventilation to breathe. About 3.5% die from the disease. Symptoms generally begin in 2 to 7 days, but some reports suggest it might take as long as 10 days. Scientists are close to developing a lab test to diagnose SARS. In the meantime, it is diagnosed by its symptoms. There is no evidence that antibiotics or antiviral medicines help, so doctors can offer only supportive care. Patients with SARS are kept in isolation to reduce the risk of transmission. Scientists aren't sure yet, but some researchers think it's a newly discovered coronavirus, the family of viruses.
In terms of population characteristics, Australia and New Zealand have much in common. Both countries have minority indigenous populations, and during the latter half of the 20th century have seen a steady stream of migrants from a variety of regions throughout the world. Both countries have experienced similar declines in fertility since the high levels recorded during the baby boom, and alongside this have enjoyed the benefits of continually improving life expectancy. One consequence of these trends is that both countries are faced with an aging population, and the associated challenge of providing appropriate care and support for this growing group within the community.
Learning to write well means discovering how to write plainly and clearly. Now that doesn't mean that plainness is the only good style, or that you should become a slave to spare, unadorned writing. Formality and ornateness have their place, and in competent hands complexity can carry us on a dizzying, breathtaking journey. But most students, most of the time, should strive to be sensibly simple, to develop a baseline style of short words, active verbs, and relatively simple sentences conveying clear actions or identities. It's faster, it makes arguments easier to follow, it increases the chances a busy reader will bother to pay attention, and it lets you center one more attention on your moments of rhetorical flourish, which I do not advise abandoning altogether.
Newspapers have one basic purpose: to get the news as quickly as possible from its source, from those who make it to those who want to know it. Radio, telegraph, television, and other inventions brought competition for newspapers. So did the development of magazines and other means of communication. However, this competition merely spurred the newspapers on. They quickly made use of the newer and faster means of communication to improve the speed, and thus the efficiency of their own operations. Today more newspapers are printed and read than ever before. Competition also led newspapers to branch out to many other fields. Besides keeping readers informed of the latest news, today's newspapers educate and influence readers about politics and
Newspapers influence readers' economic choices through advertising. Most newspapers depend on advertising for their very existence. Newspapers are sold at a price that fails to cover even a small fraction of the cost of production. The main source of income for most newspapers is commercial advertising. The success in selling advertising depends on a newspaper's value to advertisers. This is measured in terms of circulation. How many people read the newspaper? Circulation depends much on the work of the circulation department and on the services or entertainment offered in a newspaper's pages. But for the most part, circulation depends on a newspaper's value to readers as a source of information about the community, city, country, state, nation, and world, and even outer space. Movement in painting that originated in France in the 1860s and had enormous influence in European and North American painting in the late 19th century. The Impressionists wanted to depict real life, to paint straight from nature, and to capture the changing effects of light. The term was first used abusively to describe Claude Monet's painting Impression, Sunrise, 1872. The other leading Impressionists included Paul Cézanne, Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, Camille Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Alfred Sisley, but only Monet remained devoted to Impressionist ideas throughout his career.
Adams has completely undermined my confidence in these apparently sensible precautions. What he has persuasively argued, particularly in relation to seatbelts, is that the evidence that they do what they are supposed to do is very suspect. This is in spite of numerous claims that seatbelts save many thousands of lives every year. Between 1970 and 1978, countries in which the wearing of seatbelts is compulsory had on average about 5% more road accident deaths than before the introduction of the law. In the United Kingdom, road deaths decreased steadily from about 7,000 a year in 1972 to just over 4,000 in 1989. There is no evidence in the trend for any effect of the seatbelt law that was introduced in 1983. There's actually evidence that the number of cyclists and pedestrians killed increased by about 10%. Professor Richard Kimbell directed the day-funded assessment of performance unit research project in design and technology. In 1990 he founded the Technology Education Research Unit (TERU) at Goldsmiths College, University of London, which is now running a wide range of funded research projects in design and technology and IT. He has published widely in the field, including reports commissioned by the Congress of the United States, UNESCO and NATO. He has written and presented television programs and regularly lectures internationally. His latest book Assessing Technology, International Trends in Curriculum and Assessment won the International Technology Education Book of the Year Award from the Council for Technology Teacher Education at IDEA in 1999 in Minneapolis, USA. Kay Stables is Reader in Design and Technology Education and former head of the Design Department at Goldsmiths College, University of London. She started her career as a textiles teacher, moving to Goldsmiths as a part of the APU D&T research team. From 1990-1992 she was project director for the Key Stage 1 Technology SAT developments and followed this as research associate on the Understanding Technological Approaches project, which built case studies of D&T work from children aged 5 to 16. Most recently she has conducted, with Richard Kimbell, an evaluation of the impact of a technology education initiative in South Africa and is currently researching into the use of handling collections in developing D&T capability and literacy. During the day, the sun heats up both the ocean surface and the land. Water is a good absorber of the energy from the sun. The land absorbs much of the sun's energy as well. However, water heats up much more slowly than land, and so the air above the land will be warmer compared to the air over the ocean. The warm air over the land will rise throughout the day, causing low pressure at the surface. Over the water, high surface pressure will form because of the colder air. To compensate, the air will sink over the ocean. The wind will blow from the higher pressure over the water to lower pressure over the land, causing the sea breeze. The sea breeze strength will vary depending on the temperature difference between the land and the ocean. It is important to emphasize the need for hard work is essential part of studying law, because far too many students are tempted to think that they can succeed by relying on what they imagine to be their natural ability, without bothering to add the expenditure of effort. To take an analogy, some people prefer the more or less instant gratification which comes from watching a television adaptation of a classic novel to the rather more laborious process of reading the novel itself. Those who prefer watching television to reading the book are less likely to study law successfully, unless they rapidly acquire a taste for text-based materials. Organizations need to integrate their sales activities more both internally and with customers' needs, according to a new book co-authored by an academic at the University of East Anglia. The book addresses how sales can help organizations to become more customer-oriented and considers how they are responding to challenges such as increasing competition, more demanding customers, and a more complex selling environment. Many organizations are facing escalating costs and a growth in customer power, which makes it necessary to allocate resources more strategically. The sales function can provide critical customer and market knowledge to help inform both innovation and marketing.